Dragon Quest, a titan in the Japanese role-playing game genre that helped lay the groundwork for many titles to come, such as Final Fantasy, Earthbound, and many more. Dragon Quest helped establish conventions for the basis of the turn-based party combat system with equipment that modifies stats, abilities, and magic. Heck, if it wasn't for Dragon Quest, it's possible that Pokemon wouldn't exist in its form today, since it borrows a lot of those conventions from Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest had a similar monster taming system that you could use in your party introduced in Dragon Quest V back in 1992, around 4 years prior to Pokemon dropping in Japan. Anyways, over the course of years with the popularity of the Pokemon franchise, Dragon Quest decided to bust its own monster party focused game in the form of Dragon Warrior Monsters for the Game Boy. When it came with early Dragon Quest games, the trademark for Dragon Quest was already held by different intellectual property, so all the games were released under Dragon Warrior to avoid any possible legal action. However, this shortly ends about 7 years later when Dragon Quest VIII, Journey of the Curse King, came to America. Dragon Warrior Monsters has a very similar party system to Dragon Quest, with the appeal of Pokemon where there's hundreds of monsters to collect and breed to form the ultimate team. One of the main appeal for the Dragon Quest Monsters games is how well the breeding system is. It's very in-depth and allows you to create nearly any type of monster you want, with the skills you want for near perfection. After Dragon Warrior Monsters, we actually got a sequel with a dual release similar to the Red and Blue concept, being Dragon Warrior Monsters 2 Kobe or Terra, released in 2001 in the States. And then a few years later, we got some more releases on the Nintendo DS, being Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 1, released in 2006, with the sequel Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2, released 4 years later in 2010. Now, there actually were more games being remade for the 3DS, being Dragon Warrior Monsters 1 and 2, and a third Joker game, and even a professional version of Joker 2 and 3, basically a definitive version of the games with more content, including more post-game to complete after the main story. All of these are fantastic games, and I really wish Square would localize them and bring them to the States officially. With this history lesson over, we were greeted during the Dragon Quest livestream for its 35th anniversary for a new Dragon Quest Monsters game, being The Dark Prince. Let's talk about it. Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince was finally released in late 2023 for the Nintendo Switch, and it's actually a prequel/side story to the events in Dragon Quest IV, featuring the main antagonist through the run being Pizarro. Pizarro himself at this time is half human, half monster, where his father, Randolfo, the monster of monster kind, fathered a child with a human woman in order to have an offspring worthy of succeeding the throne. One day, Pizarro's mother is deathly ill. Pizarro goes to Nadiria to find his father to request him to heal his mother. However, as opposed to healing her, he actually casts a curse on Pizarro to never harm monsters again, which f***ing sucks. Fast forward a few years later and our boy has grown into a fine young man worthy of Hot Topic's attention, and suddenly, monsters attack his village. Unable to fight the monsters himself due to his father's curse, Pizarro is suddenly saved by a father-like figure named Monty, who teaches Pizarro later on how to tame monsters. Using these newfound skills and how to avoid loopholes, Pizarro sets off on a quest for revenge against his father for cursing him and inadvertently causing the death of his mother, along with the entire human race for outcasting him as a hybrid. Along the way, we get to meet some lovely friends along the way, such as Rose, the elf, who we saved by literally setting someone's hair on fire. Who causes her pain. Yet she scolds us? What a saint. We also befriend a once thief turned wholesome bro, Toilet Trouble. Fun fact, he is actually one of my favorite supporting cast members in the game. As for the Prince of Monster Kind, you can imagine we actually have some monster supporters as well besides the one we tame. We have a few monsters who favor support over Pizarro over his brother, Dolph the Destroyer, and wish to see us succeed the throne someday. As this is a new game, I'm not going to jump into spoilers into the story, though I will say I really enjoy this story. It has a classic Dragon Quest twist that you can expect that are well executed. There were times where I was completely blindsided in terms of certain alliances and motivations behind certain characters. Considering this is a prequel slash spin-off side story to Dragon Quest IV, you will get so much more out of this game in terms of story when they tie everything together and paint a picture about what else could have happened, which goes a little bit later into the late to post game. The only complaint I have with the story is sometimes the pacing can be a bit slow towards the minigame, but when it starts building, the payoff is worth it. I streamed the entire game more or less on twitch.tv/Metallic Aerox, and some nights, I really did not want to put this game down. In terms of visuals, I mean, it's a Switch game. Graphics are never the priority, nor does it make a huge difference for me. Personally, I dug the style. Slight cell shade anime style? Sounds like a good sign to me. Dragon Quest has always had a charm for me, probably due in part with the fact that the art is done by Akira Toriyama, who sadly passed away on March 1st, 2024. Rest in peace, you absolute legend. The visuals to this game are boundless. Nearly every area is unique and has a charm enough to explore thoroughly. One of the first worlds you will encounter has a tremendous waterfall, which will mind you that it's something you'll see right away within the first hour of the game, and the rest of it just has so much life and colors it really brings a smile from cheek to cheek. You see, mainly there's different types of areas within the world. You have Testria, which exists outside of Nadria and houses a lot of human settlements, and a traditional layout in terms of an environment you would expect from Dragon Quest. Well, outside of a few special areas that are going into spoiler territories. You also have the Circles of Nadria, which these locations are all unique in their own right. One of them is a volcanic landscape. One of them is more industrial, and another is, Candyland? Fucking sweet, right? Well, if you find this delicious,
stop it. Get some help.
You're in for a real treat.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
All right, enough puns. If you're still watching the video after all that, thank you, I really appreciate you. Anyway, these areas are where you spend most of the time since it's where the monsters, realms, and most of the story take place. You see, each circle has a lower, middle, and upper area called Echelon. The higher you go, the more difficult the monsters are. Don't worry though, you can't suddenly go into a higher level by mistake. You have to warp there when the story allows, which I got to say is a nice touch. Can you imagine walking in with a slime, and then suddenly you're facing down a monster that can one-shot your entire team? Usually, access to new areas and echelons are story-based progression, and even after completing them, due to how large the areas are with their own sub-areas, you'll be going back plenty of times for monsters for breeding, different items to collect, and of course, farming experience. Thankfully, traveling among these areas is pretty easy. With most Dragon Quest games released in the last 15 years, we have fast travel in the form of Zoom, which allows you to warp to key places you've already been to. And yes, between other circles as well. I would also encourage to take some time during your first run to Echelon or later on to look for items, change seasons, and just starting scouting monsters after beating the boss of the area. Since there's a lot to this area and taking down the big hitter of the boss realm makes it naturally easy to tame the monsters in the area due to your reputation growing. During your time exploring these areas, the literal seasons will change. Man, time certainly flies, right? The importance of this cannot be understated. When the weather changes, monster spawn will usually vary depending on the type of the season, which can be vital for synthesizing. Not only that, but also certain areas become more accessible, which can lead to great pickup in items in terms of gears or just very valuable meats. It also just provides a very scenic wall of exploring and encourages you to take a moment to bask in Mother Nature. One of my complaints though is the sheer size of the map. It would make a lot of sense to bring back the Monster Ride feature that was present in Joker 3 for the 3DS, where you can ride various type of monsters for faster land travel, water travel, and even air travel. The fact that these weren't present is wild to me. Either too much for the Switch or more than likely not enough budget or development time for the developers, so they probably wanted this out within the anniversary. Alright, now let's jump into the highlight for me for this entire series, the breeding and synthesizing mechanic. It's where you take two monsters and produce a new offspring. Though, sadly, you do lose the parents of the monsters you create. However, you're able to pass down any of the skill trees the parents had, and as well as any of the skills that the child can learn natively. However, there are usually limited to 3 skill trees along with some traits under certain circumstances. Also, another factor to explain are sizes. Monsters now come in 2 sizes, large and small. Large ones take up 2 slots in your team, but the upside is they usually have higher stats, more traits, which depending on your team composition can make a world of difference. In total, you can have either 4 small monsters, 2 large monsters, or 1 large and 2 small monsters. Honestly, going through the game 100%, there really isn't no wrong way to go about it. Personally, I would often have someone efficient at healing, casting support spells, buffs and debuffs to lower my opponent's stats, and then a few other higher offensive monsters to dish out major damage. That's one of the beautiful things with this game series, the amount of the depth and freedom the breeding can provide. Another thing to consider though is sometimes getting the late game or very memorable monsters within Dragon Quest lore can be quite the undertaking as well. For those who are familiar, this lovable guy, named as Stark, may look familiar, yeah? Well, I want you to see what this looks like to make this rascal. If you are considering 100% of the monster deck like I did, please, for all that is pure, use a breeding guide. The internet has a great amount of resources that'll break down what goes into what to create whatever monster you need. If it wasn't for this, I would be so lost because you could tell getting to S-Stark is, there's a lot to go through. I mentioned the offspring can learn whatever the skill trees the parents had, and here's where things get interesting for me. Suppose you have a great skill on a monster whose attack isn't quite up there to get the most out of it. Well, why not breed the monster with another monster whose child might be something more offensively capable, like an overkilling machine? In addition to the general stats, traits another factor to consider. You could think of these like abilities in Pokemon. Some traits can repel certain type of damages, provide an additional action such as a spell or basic attack depending on the AI, while others may prove a bit more useful, such as Metal Melody, that can make farming metal creatures, also known as f***ing heaps of experience points, much easier since it can be a pain early on to take them out. Monsters have their own weak, strong, and neutral system as well, similar to the water beats fire concept in Pokemon, among other turn-based combats such as Persona or even Shin Megami Tensei. What is also interesting with this game, even though some of the status afflictions or other negative effects also might be more likely or less likely to hit as resistant to anti-magic. A lot of this may seem like a lot at first, and it can be, but the game in the main story, you don't have to point for every single concept in order to be successful. And some things just make sense. Heavy spell users have IMP and Wisdom, for example. Those who have played a turn-based party RPG system, you'll fit right at home. And for those less tenured, it'll come to you.
The combat system? It's Dragon Quest. Need I say more? If you played any of the Dragon Quest games or anything inspired from it, you'll feel right at home. When you decide on your team, you'll be facing other monster tamers in the Colosseum as a part of the story for glory. Other monsters as well in the world and using familiar concepts in battle. You can use basic physical attacks to do damage without using magic power. You can use spells for offensive to take down your opponent's HP using serious damage. You can also cause debuffs to make them take more damage, give less damage to you, and one of my personal favorites, Sandstorm. Like, no joke, this is very useful. Considering some of the debuffs last anywhere from a few turn rotations at the time of this writing this review, avoiding attacks in the long game allows you to save on MP and items in terms of healing since you'll be using it less often. You can also use buffs on your team such as Oomphle to raise all your party members' attack or other support skills to bolster your chances of success. Yes, you heard that name right. One of the things I love about the series is the names. I mean, you got Sizz, Oomphle, Dazzlefash, f***ing peak fiction. Finally, with your team building for combat as well, you can equip them with equipment to help modify basic stats or even have better defenses of what they might be weak to, or even just trying to avoid certain status conditions. It's a small addition, but a welcome one to help create a highly customizable team. Not only that, but you can also have reserve party members. Think of it as something like a team you can bring with you to swap out on the fly depending on the situation. It can also act as like a second lifeline when your first row of monsters are knocked out. You can bring in a reserve monster and allow it to continue the fight even longer. Swap to something that might provide a bit more of a winning edge or even focusing on more of healing or whatever you need. And the best part about this feature is the fact that it doesn't require you to give up any of your turns like some other JRPGs, allowing you to get the full use out of the new monster and just be able to have a new strategy against whatever you're facing.
Now, we discussed on building a team. Now the bigger question comes, how do you possibly get new monsters to add? Well, my awesome viewer, it's quite simple. In combat, you have an option called Scouting. This allows you to try to convince the monster to join you with a show of force. The stronger is your monsters in comparison to them, typically the better percentage you have of winning them over. You can also use meats in order to give yourself a starting baseline above 0% to improve your chances. And if you have the patience, you can even use stat buffs like Oomphle and debuffs like Zap to further your chances too. Though I do want to inform, if you already have the monster in your team or the padlock, the chances of getting them again is much harder, though it goes back to the normal after you breed them or release them. Aside from scouting, you can also find eggs in the overworld, that once you interact with them, they will hatch into a monster. There are many different type of egg rarities that eggs come in, each with exclusive monsters from each rarity. So if you see an egg, you better be grabbing it to make the mother of all omelets there, Jack.
Making the mother of all omelets here, Jack. Can't fret over every egg.
Now, I have to admit I may be a bit biased in saying some of these games are my favorite of all time, and I love this series to death. I even started collecting games that are not even in English. This is a great time, but it's far from perfect, and a bit of a shame considering it could have been much better with some of the ideas from past entries. In Dragon Quest Jokers 3, a ride mechanic is more present. You can ride on the monsters in order to soar into the skies to go beyond what the horizon offers. You can go down into the depths of the ocean, just like those advertised in zoo books.
Now your child can visit steamy jungles, grassy plains, and the dark depths of the ocean.
Granted, some overworlds in Dragon Quest Dark Prince actually feel slightly smaller in some aspect compared to the Joker games, but it would just been a neat concept in order to take full advantages of the new areas, post-game content, and of course just exploring all around to discover new secrets. Not only that, but even during combat, you can choose to ride a monster, and by doing this, it increases the overall damage and can help give you an edge of combat, while at the same time giving you a bit of risk-reward system. If your monster is KO'd while you're riding it, you get knocked down and it takes a bit of time to recover and make more commands for your time. I'm not entirely sure how much of this feature was used in Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3, since we never got them officially translated. However, if it just felt odd with an upgrade from the 3DS to the Switch, couldn't it have been something considered to expand over on overworld exploring? Now, this might seem a minor complaint to follow, considering this was more present for free in the traditional games, but remember how hard I showcased it is getting S-Dark? Well, in previous games for the 3DS, such as Terry 3D No Wonderland, there are these special realms you can go to, which allows you to scout any monster you previously had before. Similar to the Compendium if you played Persona with some changes. This is literally a time saver because instead of having to do multi-generational synthesizing upwards of 8 monsters just to get one offspring specifically, you can just pop into one of these special gates and have a chance for it to spawn and attempt to capture it. This feature is in Dragon Quest Dark Prince in the form of DLC called the Mole Hole. $10 give you the opportunity to endless farm all the monsters you previously had, but also with some sick duds. Don't get me wrong, I get the idea of having this in the form of DLC between this and the Treasure DLC and training with the crab, but considering how this feature is now locked behind a paywall, just reminds me of what kind of era we are in gaming, I suppose. Also, I hate to be this petty, but there is this one dungeon you have to make it through in the late game, and by God, this dungeon was annoying to deal with the amount of backtracking, water manipulation, and sometimes trial and error that just took up way too much time. Ultimately, going through this on stream wasn't too bad, it's just one of the more aspects of how much time it took from going to one sector to the third sector only to realize you made a mistake, need to adjust a second sector, and undo what you did previously going through different steps, and then head back to zone 1. It's f***ing great. I love it! Anyways, once you complete the main story, the post-game, and even some of the DLC I mentioned, You are more than welcome to compete in online games with monster tamers from all around the world. The main matchmaking, it seems there isn't a whole lot of matchmaking in terms of placing against players who are at your level in terms of team composition. Sure, you may be both similar in rank, but of course, monster composition is what's going to give you the results. There is also a tournament mode that is set up as well, and an interesting one I found to be was the quickfire ones. Imagine 30 matches, autoplay with your team in the blink of an eye. You are rewarded based on your performances in these modes, even monsters and new rankings and online. I haven't delved too much into the online aspect of things, though I plan on dipping into it to see what's the meta. Another concept that's missing from the game that actually kind of surprised me is the lack of being able to trade with your friends on Nintendo Switch. Unfortunately, unlike in Pokemon where you can, trade and battle with your friends, there's a bit more limitations here. You can still battle your friends. However, in terms of like trading or breeding together with your friends who have the same copy of the game, this is absent, which is okay just because if you could breed with anybody early on in the game, it can easily destroy the experience and the grind process. But in terms of having this open up in terms of like post game, that would have been really nice to help save certain aspects in terms of the grind for the monster library. But I digress. All in all, Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince was an absolute joy to go through. As a longtime fan who still goes through the classic entries every few years, this brought so much love to my heart as a gamer, seeing something I've been hoping for years. More Dragon Quest monsters coming to the West. Sure, I really enjoy Pokemon, but the way that Dragon Quest has a handle with its stories and characters and overall world has had me far more invested in that than Pokemon ever could. The series took a lot from worked well from their times on the Game Boy and all the way to the 3DS and bring it into this new generation. A few missteps here and there, it's still a fantastic game for any fan of JRPG monster collecting games out there, and I cannot recommend this enough. Hell, even going through and gathering footage for this review, I am starting another file just to go through it all over again. Although I'm not gonna 100% the monster library this time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Comment down below if you're currently going through this game or plan on picking it up anytime soon. And if you are, what is your team setup? I'm curious to see what other people have been cooking up with. Hit subscribe to be a part of the community and turn on notifications to be alerted of my next upload, whenever that is. And I will catch you all later.
And no shit, as I've been working on this review and kind of been putting off for a few months now actually, they decide to announce that Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince is not only coming to Steam, but it's also coming to mobile. Which is great, because now I get to go through it on Steam, which I'm very excited for, because honestly, the Nintendo Switch, as much as I love the console, it's definitely showing its age, and playing on Steam hopefully can make it a bit more crisper. But also the fact that this game is coming to mobile when it's a Switch exclusive for the longest time really has me hoping that we get the Switch 2 soon, hopefully in 2025.